Marginal Gains listeners, wow, I think we really have a fun one for you all today. Somebody that I've internet known for a long time. We've never actually spoken personally or even by voice call before. But I've got Xavier Disley, owner, director of AeroCoach, probably one of the 10 people in the world who does some of the same stuff that I have done or do. And so somebody that I think we've run into each other technologically many times before, and and here we are talking in person. So Zav, welcome to the Marginal Gains podcast.
Thanks very much, Josh. And yeah, I'll echo that. I've obviously known about Josh and what he's done for many, many years now. So it's nice to, yeah, speak in person. Obviously, through a screen, but but yeah, it's nice to see you.
Oh, very fun. Very well for those of our listeners who aren't maybe familiar with you or your company or your history. Can you just give us sort of a kickoff introduction? How'd you fall into the sport of cycling, and then how did you end up owning one of the premier aero focused brands in the whole sport?
Sure. So I think the first thing I started in sport when I was relatively young. So I was competing as a rower from the age of about 13, 14. And I did indoor rowing for when I first started doing sport. It was indoor rowing I got into, which is where you compete on rowing machines in gyms. Went to the World Championships a couple of times, which was fun in America. I was all right. I wasn't amazing, but I did okay. And competed on the water as well. After rowing, some of my friends were doing triathlon, and that seemed like more fun because rowing's a lot of early mornings, and there's a lot of faff as well. I'm not a big fan of faff, so started doing triathlon. And with that, it was a case of I really enjoyed the bike and all the equipment that came with it, and I ended up going to triathlon, and all I cared about was trying to win the bike leg. And as I'm sure people probably realize, that is a poor performance strategy. So I obviously decided that the bike was the thing to focus on. I started doing time trials from 2006 onwards. And in the UK, there's a burgeoning time trial scene. It's loads of races all the time. So there was loads of access to things like that, and so I was time trialing every week, really, like in club TTs and things. I was entering some of the national championship races over shorter distances because that's what I'm best suited to, having come from rowing where the races are kind of about 7 minutes long. So from a career point of view, I actually started doing academic sports science stuff from around 2007 onwards. I was helping out with some UK sport research projects, and then I did a master's in sports performance from 2008, and then a PhD in exercise physiology and kinematics and various other associated things as part of that PhD at the University of Birmingham. And from sort of 2012, AeroCoach, the company, was kind of founded in the UK as a vehicle for doing aero testing for people. Not much was being done for a few years, but I was the one doing aero testing for AeroCoach, and then I took over the company in 2015, and then that's when, in its current incarnation, AeroCoach is now what it is today. That started in 2015, so about 8.5 years ago.
Wow. So clearly you've got the chops for it. And I know if anyone who follows Zav on Twitter, I mean, you're one of my favorite Twitter Xers, whatever it's called now.
Well, yeah.
On the sports performance side, I mean, every time there's an hour record, you post like the lap by lap times and some really fascinating analysis. So if you give, I think you're what, Xavier Disley or something like
just Xavier Disley. Yeah.
Okay. On Twitter, X, whatever the hell it's called these days. But if you're into that sort of stuff, look it up because, I say on this podcast all the time, that's like my hard line. My wall is all like the physiology stuff, right? Like, oh, no, I don't cross that line. That's when I look to you. So wherever I run out of runway, go look and see what Zav is saying about the same topic, because he's coming at it with a really unique and kind of a different starting point, which I think is really fun. So you're doing bike fitting. Is this like tunnel track? Take us back to like 2012, 2013.
Yeah, so the first thing was we were working with one of the outdoor Alpha Mantis systems, which is an aero sensor.
Oh, yeah.
People see all the aero sensors now, but these things did exist. We got it working, which was great because I think there were only a few around, and people were struggling to get it to work. We did get it to work, so it's outdoor velodrome testing we were using.
Did you have the track timing, or did you have the stick?
Both. So
Both.
we had the full kit with the stick, which was basically the add-on to the track aero system. And so we did some of that. I mean, I'd been doing like manual aero testing using power meters and things prior to that anyway. So we got the stick working for a bit, but most of the commercial stuff we were doing was kind of like post hoc analysis using power meters and speed sensors and environmental sensors and things. And we progressed from there to doing indoor sessions using the track aero system from Alpha Mantis. So Alpha Mantis is a company that was later bought by Garmin for the technology that they had, which was the ability to measure aerodynamics as you're riding around a velodrome. And that's actually, we still use that system today. It's very good and it's consistent. And as long as you've got your right inputs correct and your power meters are all calibrated and, you've done your homework, then the system itself is excellent, and we've got a good history of using it. So we've been using it for about a decade now. So with various upgrades and things. So we started off in 2015. We were testing people left, right, and center because there was not really anything available to the mass market at the time. There were wind tunnels and things, but we could test a lot of people. And we had the ability to do that. We got good relationship with the velodrome, for example. And the current count of people that we've tested now since we started is, it's like 1,500 people or something.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a lot. And
a lot.
What was interesting was that when you first started doing the aero testing, obviously the rider is the biggest, percentage of the drag of the whole bike and rider system. But people were coming to sessions and they were having limitations in their equipment in terms of what the equipment could do for them and how it would allow them to position themselves. So whether that's with aero bars that weren't massively adjustable, or whether it's because they're a particular component that they wanted to be more aerodynamic, but there was no other option for it. And that led us into product design. So we started making, the first things we were making were saddles and 1x chain rings. Before it became like a big thing, we were doing carbon non-circular 1x TT specific rings, which was fun. And then from there, everything kind of spiraled out, and we moved into the bigger stuff like wheels and full aero bar systems and full handlebars. And we've actually done a frame recently, but it's not been like officially released yet for another company. So so we've pretty much done most things now, but there's always more to do.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah,
no, that's fascinating. So we'll dive a little. I think we've talked a little bit about Alpha Mantis on here before with Robert Chung.
Yes.
I think when we had him on the show, and I haven't had Andy Francione on, but now that we're talking about it again, I should call Andy and get him on because he was kind of the guy behind that program. But yeah, I think one of the things that, and like you, I actually had 2 aero sticks that we bought at Zip. I think we had like serial number 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And really struggled to make them work. And I think
yeah,
you're still seeing some of that in that space today. I know people are sending me those products all the time to look at and test. And I am yet to see one that I would really say is like ready for prime time. Are you involved in any of that?
So we buy everything that we can see, but we did until we realized that, and I think maybe this will change. I don't know, but I just don't think the market is there necessarily for an aero sensor for the general consumer, because you get, so let's say I think exists. It's you glue it to your bike, or you blue tack it to your bike or something, and it works immediately and it tells you what your CDA is at all times. What are you going to do with that information? Are you going to use it during a race to make sure you hold your position? Okay, that's great. Are you going to use it to test equipment? That's also fine. You need to now buy a ton of equipment to be able to test it, or borrow it off your friends or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that knowing what your CDA is something that the general consumer can make use of currently. I also don't think that these devices are quite there in terms of being able to resolve rolling resistance changes whilst you're out on the open road. And so when all that gets packaged into what number it's giving you, if it's assuming a constant rolling resistance, then the number moves around too much. So I don't see, I currently don't see the value in it. And if I did, we would, I mean, we've got sensors, you know, in the warehouse behind me, a whole stack of them. If I did see the value in it, then we'd be using them, or I'd be personally using one or whatever. There's some bits of things that look interesting, but for the moment, I don't think it's there. And it seems to me, and I don't know if this is being a bit rude or something, but sometimes it seems to be just an exercise in, can I make an aero sensor, rather than is there value in making an aero sensor? And so the box tick is like, yeah, we're really good. We can make a sensor that'll tell you what your CDA is. And it's like, have you thought a couple of steps down the line as to whether that's marketable? Is it going to be usable? Is it going to be, you know, how user friendly is it? How easy it is to install? All these kind of things. And so I feel as though sometimes people have kind of missed those steps, which we've had to learn over the years. And I'm sure you've had to learn that sort of thing as well. It's like you can come up with a great product idea, but unless it's actually going to result in a thing that's usable by the end consumer, then it's not a product, really. It's just it's still a prototype. So
that's a great point. Yeah, I've played that through in my head a million times as well, with, you know, who's the customer for this, and then what do they do with it? And, you know, if you're in the middle of your event, and what are you doing to make your CDA lower, right? Are you you know, is it just data attainment? You know, like, I need to turtle my head more. I need to do this. And like, are you able to focus on your racing if you're focused on that number while you're trying to focus on the, you know, how much data is too much data?
Exactly. And I think that there's obviously the risk that if someone like me is saying, don't buy an aero sensor or whatever, which is not what I'm saying, but if that's how it comes across, it's not because I want people to come and have an AeroCoach session and they should forget these sensors and you must only come and see someone who can see you at a wind tunnel or a velodrome. That's not the case. It's just that I don't think the value is there yet in a sensor that will, because I don't think they can return effective live CDA yet because of the rolling resistance issues I was talking about. If they did, I would be using one, and I don't. So that's my position, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. It could be a great tool, but I tell people routinely, I feel like we're 10 years away.
Maybe.
You know, but and that's just based on, you know, obviously progress in these things is nonlinear, but based on the progress we've seen over the last 15 years, you know, we are not that far away from that original Alpha Mantis Aero Stick of 2010 or 2009 or whatever that was. You know, we're better, or the things I've seen are better. They have better interfaces, but they're not giving you really much more useful data. So is that another 10 years, or does that kick up and AI gets involved and other things happen and that 10 years becomes 5? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe it's more of an integration with, and I do think the rolling resistance thing is a big problem in terms of figuring out how to do this live stuff. Which is why when you're testing in a velodrome, or whether it's indoor or outdoor velodrome or something like that, it's great because it's the same, generally speaking, and you can very accurately measure what it is and control for it. I mean, maybe there's people need to think a little bit more about, you know, measuring vibration and whether you can use that as a proxy for changes in rolling resistance and stuff whilst you're out on the road. But changing road surfaces, like we know because we've done the testing, like it really does affect things loads. I want people to focus heavily on that, and I haven't seen that from the people we've had contact with. I haven't seen people putting enough emphasis on that part of the equation, and everyone's more interested in getting extra yaw angles and all this kind of thing. And it's just like, forget it. Focus on the rolling resistance, because it's such a big part of it. Otherwise, you'll just end up with numbers that aren't relevant to, you know, absolute numbers that aren't relevant, and you end up with CDAs too high or too low or whatever, and then numbers that aren't repeatable because you can't measure the changes in real life. I feel like I'm on a rant here.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. Those are good points. And I guess to put some perspective on it for the listeners, I remember first time I ever saw the Alpha Mantis track system, which is based more on like timing, right? It's essentially a bunch of sensors around the track that is giving you time, essentially. So there's no direct aero measuring component in it. And I had gone out to LA to meet with Jim Manton and Robert Chung and kind of the Alpha Mantis team and see this thing in action. And I remember thinking like, wow, how accurate can it be when you're just using, the time between distance, um, essentially. And very quickly, I mean, they're running, and I remember Robert Chung being like, "Oh yeah, look, his CRR is coming down because the tires are warm." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh God, we can see like you can pick that out, and you absolutely on a wood track you can pick out that minor drop in rolling resistance due to the tires coming to temperature." Um, the accuracy and the repeatability of that system is remarkable to me, even though you're not directly measuring the thing that you're trying to measure. So
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so for people who don't know the exact details of it, you have the track geometry of each individual track that you're testing at is baked into the system. So when you're measuring where people's location is at particular timing points on the track, you know what the banking angle is, and therefore you can start calculating lean angle and potential yaw angles, because you do get that on the track as well. So it's a very good system, and that's why we've continued to use it over these years, because we've got great data out of it, and we know that the stuff that we see and the way that we do our testing is relevant to and comparable with the way that we use the wind tunnel, which we use the wind tunnel a different way as well. And when we do outdoor testing, because we still test on outdoor velodromes and do the manual testing that I said I've been doing for many years, and we can link those all together, so you don't end up with a situation where you have like super high CDA in one location, super low in another. It's all kind of like, as real world as you can get in an environment that's quite artificial.
awesome. So I have so many questions for you. Coming off that, if you could have one sensor or one device that doesn't exist today that would really help you unlock like this the next thing, what would it be? And I think from what you were just saying, I have a guess, but
well, maybe wrong resistance. I think that we have information on that more these days than we used to, and things like tire pressure as well. A CDA sensor would be great, but it's what you do with the information. I think the best thing people can use for themselves these days is a power meter, because there's so much you can do with it. And so I think that's hard to beat, to be honest. We started with heart rate, when I was back in the day.
Me too.
And the good thing about it, I mentioned I used to do indoor rowing. You're sat looking at a computer screen, and that's giving you effectively your power output. And if you train harder, your power output goes up and you get faster. Similarly with cycling, if you keep everything the same, you train harder, your power output goes up and you go faster. But with a power meter, you can start to either you can do it, or if someone, maybe a coach, is helping you or something, then you can unlock instances where the higher power isn't doing what you want it to do, and therefore you're less aerodynamic, and you can focus on maybe changing your equipment or your position or something like that. So I think really the crux of it is the power meter, which starts everything off, because then that indicates what the limitations and the benefits of the things that you're doing are, and then from there, wrong resistance sensor would be great. Like that would make my life a lot easier, because we do a lot of testing and it would just make things much quicker. But an aero sensor is not a bad idea. I just think that it's as you say, technology is way off from making that like a consumer friendly product. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So as you again doing what you do and what we do, what do you think's the next frontier? I mean, I feel like the UCI's relaxed the rules a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing some exciting things happening, but to me, it still feels a lot like we're just kind of we've expanded the doing of the same stuff to the new rules. What's next?
That's a nice way of looking at it. Yeah, I think that one of the issues with trying to go too wacky with things in a UCI space is that what if it gets banned later? And so you always have this kind of like slight disconnect between what you want to maybe achieve and what you think is possible, and what is going to be commercially viable and result in you not going under as a company. So as a manufacturer, you absolutely just push the boundaries of what you can possibly do. And like, we've got a product coming up which we're nearly ready to send to the UCI, which I'm convinced they're going to say no to. you know, we're going to try and see what we get. But in terms of the next frontier of things, what we've seen recently has been more integration of stuff, and that is going to be, first of all, we saw bikes designed with wheels. So they were like, it was specifically designed as a system, and that was great. And then you had bikes with handlebar systems that were all designed to integrate together. And then, you know, since 2016, you've seen bikes that are designed specifically to interact with the rider in a manner that hadn't really been seen to that extent before, with the Hope bike, the GBT Museum in Rio, and no, sorry, that was 2020. Yeah, but I mean, there was some interaction going on in Rio, but well, anyway, the idea of having the rider interacting with the bike is a big one, and we may see things move more in that direction. But again, you are very much constrained by consumer needs and wants. And those things aren't necessarily the same, and they don't align the whole time. You might make something that the consumer probably needs, but it might not be something that at that time the consumer necessarily think that they want. So you might make a component or a device or something that makes someone definitely a lot faster, but the consumer's like, whoa, that's a bit crazy. I'm not into that. And then 5 years later, it becomes the thing. But at the time, it's not the thing. And so getting that balancing act right is very difficult. And so you may end up with a thing that just doesn't, a component or whatever device that doesn't hit the mark, whether it's visually or in terms of how it works and things like that, but then becomes the thing later. But in answer to your question, I think we'll probably see more integration, but also, I mean, what I want to see and what I think we're seeing are slightly different things. I want to see more openness from manufacturers about data and how things work and how things compare and what you can do to make yourself faster, rather than just buy our stuff. And there's been a bit of a swing, it seems to me, recently from companies being more open with the data and testing that they've done, and allowing, you know, having that information out for people, to just a state of just buy our stuff and you'll go quicker. And I'd like to see that swing back to a slightly more open environment, because I feel like there can be some misinformation out there. And I'm not, as a you know, customer myself, I've still am, I want to make sure that if I'm buying a component or whatever, it's the right thing. And so, I hope that there'll be more openness. There probably will be more integration, but at least sort of justified integration would be a great way of looking at that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think I've talked on the podcast before, but I know, like, we have sort of this secret squirrel society that's like us and Ceramic Speed and Rex and Zero Friction Cycling and kind of a lot of the chain lubricant players. And one of the things that we've been discussing with each other is like, how do we develop better standards for the testing of that? And I think, you know, to your point, I mean, a better, more consistent methodology for studying aero would be huge, because I think, you know, I'm sure, you know, just like me, you look at some of these things and, I mean, these claims are like, well, I don't even know how you get to that claim. And then, but you can't dig in enough to understand their testing. A great example, there's a sock company here in America that just put an aero sock out, and I think they're claiming like 24 watts of savings or something. And we looked in on the data, and they said, yeah, that was at 38 miles per hour, because we wanted to optimize it for sprinting. And it was like, okay, what? like that doesn't make any, okay, you know. And I say all the time, I really want to see the best in people, and I think in general, people in this industry are not out there lying and trying to, you know, obfuscate and screw the customer, right? I really believe that people are generally meaning well. But at the same time, I think a lot of them are doing things that are kind of obfuscating and potentially screwing the customer because of the lack of transparency at the front end. And
I think
I'd love to see that as well.
Yeah, I think that I obviously I get super frustrated with that kind of thing because sometimes people are being disingenuous, right? And they're absolutely trying to cherry pick or just ignore things or lie outright. But sometimes people don't understand the data enough to know that putting out data at 38 miles an hour for a sprinter is not relevant, and it is disingenuous to say that everyone's going to get this or have that as your headline number. And so for us, it's a bit frustrating because if we make, let's say we make a new component or something that's a little bit better than the last one, which was already the best we could have done at the time, and we make something that says 5 watts at 45 kilometers an hour. For us, that might be an enormous win because it might be 5 watts on top of a component that was still pretty good. Whereas you have a company who's like, nah, we made someone that's like 20 watts better. And you're like, okay, right. So everyone's going to think we're now 15 watts behind because they've just done this testing at static yaw and they've done this, that, and the other. And yeah, so I think from our perspective, we have to kind of bite our lip and just ignore it when someone comes out with some outlandish claim and know that our stuff is, because we've tried to work on our protocols so hard, and that's something that, and we've got a new engineer who started like a couple of weeks ago, and he's just smashing protocols right now, trying to get the CFD stuff that we're doing, his little project, well, it's a big project actually, throw him in the deep end, the CFD stuff that he's doing to match up with the wind tunnel data, to match up with the track data that we've got. And we haven't even started on design work for this project he's on. It's all about making sure that we're in a perfect position so that we can then do the design later and we know that what we're doing is right. And you might end up with something where someone will say that ours is worse or whatever. But if we've done our homework correctly, then enough people will also find out that the stuff that we've made is okay, if not better. And then it'll get used, and you end up with this history of people doing independent testing where your thing like does pretty well. I remember a great quote from Gerard Freeman where he said that, or maybe Phil White, but for those people both from Cervelo at the time, where they said they were happy to finish second in everyone's wind tunnel tests because they were the benchmark everyone was working off. And when we've got equipment that's being sent to World Tour teams and stuff like that, and they want things for wind tunnel testing, they come back and they say either, yeah, your stuff won our test, or it was, second or whatever, then, and they're all using wildly different protocols and things. We know that we've at least done as good a job as possible to make our stuff work in as many different scenarios as we can. So I think that's definitely something that if we do have to bite our lips sometimes, and yeah, it is frustrating when people come out with outlandish claims, but we just have to, whatever, do what you want. We're just going to carry on trying to do things correctly as much as we can, and much of it's taken from the academic research and peer review. The way that we do things is effectively preparing it for peer review, because we know people are going to test our stuff at some point. And so we don't release something until we are convinced that it is the fastest thing possible. And so, if you have that in your head, then you'll be okay. That's our stance. And so far it's working. But yeah, you do have to kind of like just ignore some of the rubbish that you see spouted. Unfortunately, it's a shame.
Yeah. Well, and I think you guys are in a tough spot. I mean, we were years ago with Zip had put ourselves in a similar spot, similar with Cervelo, right? Where you're always kind of number one or number two, even in your competitors' data. But the risk with every new product is if it's even just slightly above average, that's like a huge loss, right? That makes you look really bad. Like, oh, they're actually fifth in this test, and that's terrible. And so I totally feel the stress and and the challenge that you have. And I love your way of saying, you're preparing it for peer review, because that's, I think, when you're a small company trying to make it in the beginning, I see people doing all sorts of crazy stuff, right? Making the outlandish claims, what do you have to lose, right? And then once you're at AeroCoach, being fourth place in the wind tunnel, in a legit wind tunnel test, is a loss. Right. And so, I can really feel your stress on that. I want to ask you talk about CFD, and, I was part of that project, God, 2008 through 10, I think, with Matt Godo at Star CCM and
Oh yeah,
Intelligent
yeah, yeah.
Flight, and we did those 3 papers at the AIAA that got published at, I think, all those years. But I hear now, I talk to people all the time, like, oh yeah, that sort of your settings or sort of the kernel of what the CFD that people are running today. I think for our listeners, it was really the first time that you had both accurately translational and rotational flows modeled at the
Hmm.
same time in a bicycle with 2 spinning wheels type of a system. I've been out of that world for a number of years, and so can you or will you tell me, like, kind of what's that advance to? I think we were thrilled that we were in the low 90% of wind tunnel type um, matching wind tunnel data. We were in
Sure,
the
sure.
consistently, it'd be like 93, 94% of the wind tunnel data across yaw angles, which at
Mhm.
the time was, people weren't even getting like 60% of the ways there. So that was huge. Or where is that today? And is that creeping up on that nearly
So
matching or?
so we try to, certainly from our perspective, we have to make sure that the settings that we're using in CFD match up with the wind tunnel and the track data or outdoor data if it's not a track component that we've seen. So we start with benchmarking stuff in the real world, and then the CFD needs to match up with the data we've actually got. So I think that sometimes I think the what we found, and goodness knows how everyone else does it, but what we found internally is that um, the ranking is bang on. Like, we can get everything ranked
Mm,
correctly. The exact differences in terms of point whatever of what might change a little bit
mm-hmm.
in CFD, but we have the ranking and the gaps between them in terms of percentage ranking is similar. So we're very happy with the protocols that we have at the moment. And so this project that we're working on, one of the projects we're working on is a new track project, and we've got quite a few different things that will feed into that in terms of like skews and different items that we need to be measuring. And we've got like a whole ream of real life track data on that. And so we're working through that at the moment to make sure that the CFD is correct, and getting all the meshing in the correct areas and using the right bikes to do the testing in, because that's important too. So we've got scans of frames and all this kind of thing. That's actually not my area. So we've got Andy and Joe working on that at the moment. And my input from that is more the conceptual design part from top down, and the kind of like guiding of, once we're starting to do the design and the protocol stuff is figured out, working with the guys to work on the designs and see if we can make stuff that's faster. So I'm probably not best placed to go through all of that with you at the moment, because they're way better than me. But yeah, no, we're very happy and confident that our CFD stuff matches up, and we've been using a similar CFD system for a number of years now. So we're on a 2nd generation of road wheels, time trial road wheels, and the data that we've had from those has been pretty good.
That's great. It's really fun to see that come along, and I think it seems so straightforward, and then it's so hard, right? I remember as we were doing it,
Yeah.
you're talking to like aircraft guys, and they're like, we went to some conferences. We actually won a huge award at the 2012 Salt Lake Supercomputing Conference, and one of the guys from Intel, he's like, "This is so much harder than aircraft."
Oh,
And
right.
you're like, like that is not what people would expect, but
No.
but it's true. I mean, these low speeds, you're kind of at like these weird transitional Reynolds numbers, like flows. Uh, it the translating in, the rotating, like this is bloody hard, and then you've got a
Yeah.
human who's doing God knows what on top of
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think that we try to, so when we're doing tunnel testing, we don't just do static yaw and things. We use moving
mm,
swings of yaw to establish baselines and stuff. And I think that was one of the things for us that made a huge difference. Certainly when it came to like positioning riders, because you can put someone in the tunnel and stick them at 5 degrees static yaw, for example, and have them in a particular position, and you'll get laminar flow at some point over their body, which makes their
mm,
CDA look super low and really amazing. and then the second you move them off angle, or the second you have wind that comes at them kind of like in a sneaky pattern or whatever, it goes. And so you end up with people, and I think this is why some people in the past, and even still now, to be honest, have had like a pushback against doing wind tunnel testing for body position. And this will translate later to wheels and things too, but because you'll go into the tunnel and someone might tell you, yeah, 5 degrees yaw, CDA is this, it's amazing. You go outside and it's a load of rubbish. It's because you haven't done that properly. And we found a similar thing with wheels. And we're putting sensors on wheels around the track to see exactly how much the fork is turning and things, to understand when you're off axis from the down tube, like what impact that's having. And loads of stuff where you have to try and add in as many variables as you can to capture as much as possible. But it is really difficult. And we have as I said, I'm not the engineer necessarily, so the guys are having to really work through this stuff and make sure that the data that we're getting in the computer is actually matching up with the real world stuff. And I think we've seen this in some instances before, where that it might even have been, I think it was probably Zip, where it seemed to us as a casual observer that there was one generation of Zip wheels, it was relatively recently, where I don't know if they must have changed the CFD or some kind of protocol or something, but some of the wheels just weren't as good as the last ones or as good as the later ones. And when you see something like that from a company, where someone comes out with something and they think it's better because everyone's working hard and no one's like just saying, put out a worse one or whatever. But there's been some change in the way that they're processing the data, or some change in the CFD settings that hasn't translated. So everyone's worked really hard. They've got a product that they think is great because it says it's good in the way they're testing it, but it hasn't necessarily resulted in the right thing later. And I think that's where we have this disconnect between sometimes manufacturers' data that they have and then real world data when people are actually riding it. And it's not disingenuous at all. It's because people have, there might have been, I don't want to say a mistake, but like, a change in the way that you're trying to create a product.
Yeah. I think, like we changed the protocol all the way back. Well, I don't know what they do now, but in 2001, I changed our protocol from like a yaw out sweep to a yaw back sweep. And the wind tunnels we have access to now, and particularly the balances and the turning plates and all that, it's just gotten better over 20 something years. But, this was pretty simple stuff, and people would go, 0, 2.5, 5, 7.5. And we realized, or I had the realization going out and coming back, that, it's a hysteresis loop. Like, once you stall, it doesn't repeat on the way back.
Yeah.
And so at the time we just said, well, okay, our new protocol is we're going to take a baseline at 0, go all the way out to 30, and then bring it back. And that's the new curve. And, it was hard for a couple of years there because, we were using the same Texas A&M wind tunnel that Head was using, and they were still using a 0 out, and we were using a 0 back. And of course, our data looked worse, but our data was much more real world predictive. But then and so they changed their protocol. I think most of the industry started using that probably through the mid 2000s. But then you would have a company come along and go to some tunnel and do the 0 out protocol again and be like, these wheels are, they have an 18-degree stall angle. You're like, they don't. That's not. But I think that's a great point, that like, those people aren't necessarily being disingenuous. They made the thing, they took it to the wind tunnel, they did the protocol the wind tunnel people suggested, and their wheel looked smoking fast. And then it just didn't prove to be that very realistic in the real world. So that's certainly an area where we could use some actual standards and agreement within the industry.
I think so. I think that what we're doing at the moment is we're just sitting and waiting. We produce the thing, and if it's fast, people will figure it out, to be honest. And a good example of that, we've got a new track 4-spoke wheel, which we made for Paris. This thing's bonkers fast. Like, it's faster than most front disc wheels. And people have been buying them. Federations have been requesting them for testing. They will figure it out, and they'll find out how good it is, and then they'll use it. And we could spend £1 million on marketing or something, but I'd rather we just had the best thing. And then if people find out, then great, because yeah, the marketing money keeps sometimes feels like a limitless money sink, and you're just pouring stuff down the drain. And so I'd rather just keep making lots and lots of fast things, and eventually everyone will have them, I suppose.
Yeah. It was Andy Ording, the original president of Zip, in my tenure there. He had one of my favorite lines ever. He said, the thing with marketing is only a third of your marketing dollars actually do anything at all. And the problem is you never know which third.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
exactly.
it feels like you're spending all this, you're like 2/3 of this money we're just setting on fire and it's just worthless. And the problem is we just don't know which that is to stop doing it. And so, better to, I was so fortunate to work under him of that era because he's like, I would way rather just pour this money on engineering
Yes.
And let the product talk than spend it on the marketing. So
yeah, it takes a while for it to percolate, right? When you've got a good product, it takes a while for people to find out about it. From a independent testing point of view, but that's really the approach we've taken, is that we'd rather spend more money on more core hours and CFD and more prototypes and things like that, because that will result in a better product at the end of the day, rather than just the thing that everyone's heard of. And you might sell a few or whatever, but I'd rather have a better product.
Awesome. Well, this has been wonderful. We'll just wrap it up. Question I want to ask you: can you recommend for our listeners where in the internet, what books, what blogs, where are they not going that they should be going if they're marginal gainers like ourselves?
Goodness. I don't really know. I think there is a good. I would say that the cycling news industry these days have got very good people positioned in the right locations to be spotting tech for people, right? And I haven't really explained that very well. So the journalists who are involved in spotting tech at big events and understanding how these things work and the relevance of them, the quality of that journalism, I think, has improved a lot these days compared to what it used to be, which was just so-and-so's got a thing. They've told us it's 100% faster than the last one, so right. maybe buy it or whatever. And so and then there's a wealth of different outlets for news, and I think that looking at what the pros are doing is a great way of doing that, because these days professional cyclists and triathletes and cycling federations and things are absolutely spending hard-earned money of their own to do independent testing to make sure that they are riding the absolute best thing. And you can see that in pro cycling now, where there's lots of debadged stuff everywhere. The teams are all doing independent testing, independent of their sponsors, to find out what the best thing is, and then going to the sponsor and saying, you don't make the fastest thing, so we're just going to buy one instead. Or you're going to foot the bill, which is great, because that pushes everyone up a notch, because
for sure.
And so if you just frequent the news sites, yes, there'll be the odd kind of sponsored post where so and so is trying to push a particular product and things, but if you look at the people who are going to races and spotting the little tiny interesting things, so whether it's someone who's changed their crank set to a different thing, or they've got a different chain or chain lube, or their helmet or skin suit or something like that, I think that's very insightful. And we always, from our point of view, always try and keep on top of that as much as we can, is to understand what everyone else is using. So if you want to keep on top of it too, then the pro stuff is a great way of understanding what the focus people are putting at a particular point. So maybe a couple of years ago it was everyone went mad for wheels, and now that's kind of come back a little bit more, and skin suits as well, and helmets and things like that. So seeing where the pro teams are putting their money is a great way of seeing where you might want to spend. Fine, your budget might be not quite as big as a pro team, but at least you can see the proportion of where people are focusing. So things like skin suits and helmets and wheels and stuff, if you're a time trialist, so a great way to make improvements.
The one caveat I'll add to that, I always tell people, if a team has more than 8 sponsors on the jersey, then don't look at what they're doing. There's definitely there's still a bunch of teams out there doing total rubbish, and they have they have very little choice in that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
I'd love to see. I mean, it was when we got with CSC back in 2003. I remember the level of understanding was so low, and the writers believed what they believed, the directors believed what they believed, that the companies were basically forcing them to ride whatever, and nobody knew anything really. And to see that change over these years has been really remarkable. And I know the discussions I have with pro teams, I'm sure you're in the same. I mean, they're very high level discussions, right? It's not, like you said, they're coming to you with data, or I know in some cases, like we've been hired to do third party sort of debate settlement between teams and sponsors on things, where
Oh
they
yeah.
say, hey, you test it and tell us what the answer is because we're in disagreement. And that just didn't exist even, I think, even 6-7 years ago.
Oh, we've definitely done that. And
Yeah.
there was one particular project that was massive, which we did for a team, and yeah, that resulted in all sorts of stuff afterwards. I think that one of the issues we have now is that because we've got a bit more skin in the game with the kind of the variety of products that we make, that yeah, it's a bit more tricky to be the third party independent thing if you've
Yeah.
got that. But we do have, and we have pro athletes coming to sessions with us to test their pro kit, so that they can then go to the team and say, look, I paid for this session myself, and I've found that this skin suit or this wheel or the new frame that you've got us riding isn't very good. I want you to take that information to the sponsor because this is my particular event, whether it's road sprinter or time trialist or whatever, and I want you to sort it out. And that kind of pressure on sponsors, like I like it. I think it's good because back in the day, sponsors who were making equipment, they could lie about component weight maybe, and that was it. Whereas now you can, you couldn't really lie about component weight because you could just measure it and that was it. Whereas now you can measure the aerodynamic drag of something. If a sponsor says it's quicker and everyone else says no, it's not, then it's the sponsor's responsibility to make it so. And I like that because all that will do is make better equipment for everybody and as I said, it'll kick everyone up a notch, and it'll make sure that everyone's kit just gets better and better and better, rather than the situation you mentioned before where everyone's just forced to ride a thing. No one knows if it's better or not. Everyone goes on feel, and the stuff doesn't really, there's no kind of like step change in terms of the technology. Whereas now you've got to do it because you've got to be on top, which is great, and I love it. And that's the environment I want to be in. So yeah.
I agree. It's exciting times.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Xavier, so awesome talking with you. I think our listeners are going to absolutely love this one. And hopefully you'll come back on again here soon sometime, because this was really great.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I'd love to.
Wonderful. Well, thanks a ton to you, and everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Marginal Gains.